Hi, welcome to Sherwood New Life Online. My name is Trevor. Before we get started, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. That way you can stay up with us and see whenever we post, whatever we post, and you can keep up with us. So, a few weeks ago, my wife and I, we got the opportunity to go on vacation. It had been a very long time since we had been on vacation, so it was a good weekend for us to just get away and go relax a little bit. And there was a morning that we were sitting there and we were reading our Bibles, and I've been going through Daniel, and I was kind of rereading some parts, and so as I was reading through it, I started to notice something. I started to see a pattern, and through reading some study notes that I had and a commentary that I had that I like to read alongside my Bible, I noticed something that I hadn't ever noticed before. So I want to give you a little bit of background on what's going on as we enter the book of Daniel. So before the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of Babylon, has gone into Jerusalem, and he has taken over and taken the young men from Jerusalem that are young, that are healthy, that are able to serve, and he has taken them to Babylon in order to serve the kingdom. And so right in chapter 1, we see that Daniel sets himself apart. God gives him the wisdom to set himself apart from all of the others, because God has a special purpose for Daniel in this situation. And so that's kind of where we're at. That's where Daniel's at. And there's plenty of time that passes between each of these chapters, and even during some of these chapters as things are going on, years and years and years are passing. So jumping into chapter 2, we see that Nebuchadnezzar, who's still the king of Babylon, has this dream. And I'm just going to blow through this real quickly. You can read the full thing in Daniel 2. But we see that there is a statue in this dream, and the head is made of gold, and the chest and the arms are made of silver. The torso, the stomach, they're made of bronze. The legs are made of iron, and the feet are made of iron and clay. And so he wants to know what this means, because he doesn't have any clue, but he knows that it means something. So he calls on all of his magicians, all of his, just the people that are supposed to come help. This is their purpose, right? To interpret these things and to understand these things. And he wants them to not only tell him what the dream means, but he wants them to tell him what the dream was. So he doesn't give them anything to go off of in order to interpret this dream. And none of them can do it, right? And in comes Daniel, and Daniel is able to not only tell him the dream, but interpret the meaning of the dream. And jumping into the end of Daniel 2, as Daniel has given this interpretation, as Daniel has given exactly what the dream was, Nebuchadnezzar, we see in Daniel 2, chapter 46, it says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell face down, worshipped Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery.'" The king then goes on to promote Daniel. He then goes on to promote Daniel's friends, who are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in chapter 3, we really focus on those three. This, of course, is the story of the fiery furnace. And in this chapter, we see that Nebuchadnezzar builds a statue, another statue, a large golden statue, but we don't know what the statue is of. It could be himself. It could be of one of the Babylonian gods. It could be his patron god. We don't know exactly who he modeled this statue after. But what we know is that when trumpets sounded, he had commanded everybody in the kingdom to turn and bow down to this statue. And we see that these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse to bow down. And so Nebuchadnezzar throws them into this furnace. And in learning about the furnace, it's not anything that I think I thought of as a kid. It was this large furnace with a hole on the top and a hole in the front. And so they were tossed into the top of this furnace, and I think I always pictured them being tossed into the front, but anyway. But we see that they're unharmed in this fire, this raging fire that was so hot that it killed the guards that threw them in. They survived. And when Nebuchadnezzar looked into the fire, he not only saw the three of them, but he saw a fourth figure. And so then they come walking out of the fire, and it says that in the Bible, it says that not only were they not hurt, but their clothes were not singed, and they didn't even have the smell of smoke on them. So in Daniel chapter 3, we see in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." So reading these verses, reading these stories, I think going back to, when I grew up in church and I grew up in Sunday school, you would hear these stories individually, but going through them back to back in the Bible, it's really interesting to see, because in Sunday school it was always, this is what happened, Nebuchadnezzar praised God, yay, now Nebuchadnezzar is a follower of God. And what's funny is looking at it, now, and looking at it with a little more context. Nebuchadnezzar followed all of the gods of the Babylonian belief and the belief system of the Babylonians. And so he had all of these other gods. So when he sees that there is a God that has helped Daniel or helped Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his initial instinct is to add that God to whatever group of gods he already has. So we see that in the story of Daniel and interpreting the dream for Nebuchadnezzar, he just praises Daniel's God. We don't see him elevate Daniel's God. We don't see him add Daniel's God to this larger grouping of gods. He just recognizes Daniel's God. When we see the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we see that he elevates Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God up to that level of, oh, he's one of our gods now. Still, he's worshiping this whole group of gods. He's worshiping this whole belief system and just adding God as part of it. But he still recognizes that God is a lower tier than some of his other gods. It's not until chapter 4 that we see that Nebuchadnezzar actually has to have a dream from God that then has to come true, and he has to go completely crazy and eat grass like a cow and grow his hair out for him to finally come to the realization that there was one God. And then he was elevated back into power of his kingdom after going crazy for a little while. So this is this whole thing, and I feel like every time we hear these stories, there's big points that get picked out, and we look at all of these stories individually. But when we look at them all together, we see this transition of Nebuchadnezzar coming to the realization that there is this one powerful, benevolent God that rules over any others that he might believe in, whether he fully came to the point that he denounced all of these other gods or anything like that. We don't know. We're not told. Over the course of these three stories, we see that Nebuchadnezzar is on this journey of realizing and focusing in on this one God. As Pastor Adam spoke on last week, we've forgotten our first love. And this is a really weird way to connect these two. You might be thinking, what's going on? What's the point here? The point is that we may not have a bunch of other gods that we're worshiping. We may not have a bunch of other deities that we believe in. But we still have things in our everyday life that we spend our time and attention on. Every day, we have things that we spend our time and attention on. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's friends. Maybe it's family, and that's all great. Those are necessary. Those are great things to have in our lives, but they can't ever take the place of God. A lot of times we have forgotten our first love because we are so busy with the things that are around us, with the world that's around us. We live in such a busy and crazy world. I'll give you an example. Over the last 2 weeks, my wife and I have had quite the time. We have had a car that hit a deer. The following morning, the electrical panel where we live completely blew out and had to be ordered and replaced. And then a tire fell off of a wheel of our other vehicle. And then just this week, after all of that was fixed, the brakes went out on one of the vehicles. This isn't something that I want to point attention and say, oh, look at me, oh, poor me, look at us. But I want to tell you that that's just something, that's just 1 2-week stretch in my life. And there's plenty of stretches of time in all of our lives where things get busy and things take priority. And so it's very hard to try and figure out, okay, I have all these things, I've got all of these things that I need to do. Where do I make time for God? See, the awesome thing about God is that he doesn't need an hour. He doesn't need a full day. He doesn't need a week of attention. He just wants to spend time with us. And even in the chaos, even in the middle of everything that's going on, and in the middle of our lives, our struggles, the things that we're going through, we see in Psalms 46:10, be still and know that I am God. So when everything's going on around us, it's time to remember our first love. And all it takes is a moment to just be still and say, God, you are my God. And it took Nebuchadnezzar a while. He didn't even really start to worship God until chapter 3. He had to encounter God twice to really get to a point where he even elevated him as a God that he would worship. And for those in this church, or if you're watching online, we have that one God. We know that there is one God. So I would encourage you this morning as you are about to start your week, heading back to work, I would encourage you to take time every day, if you can do it, to just spend a moment. Maybe it's the moment right after you wake up. Maybe it's the time just 5 minutes sitting in your car before you go into work. Maybe you work at home. Take 5 minutes, leave that room, go to another room, spend some time just sitting down and just say, God, I'm here.